I never imagined that a simple electrical outlet on the side of my house would turn into a $400 nightmare. But that's exactly what happened when Carol Timmons became the president of our homeowners association. Let me back up a bit. My name is Trent, and I bought my first house in Mesa, Arizona about 2 years ago. It's a modest 3-bedroom ranch in the Saguaro Heights development, nothing fancy, but it's mine. The neighborhood seemed perfect when I moved in. Quiet streets, well-maintained homes, and reasonable HOA fees of only $75 a month. What could go wrong, right? Everything was fine until this past March when Carol Timmons somehow convinced enough people to vote her in as HOA president. I didn't even know there was an election happening until I saw the notice on the community board that she'd won. That should have been my first warning sign. Carol was one of those women who seemed to have infinite free time and an equal amount of pent-up energy that she needed to direct at someone or something. She was in her early 50s, always wore perfectly pressed khakis with designer polo shirts, and had that specific haircut that screamed, "I'd like to speak to your manager," from a mile away. Her husband worked some high-paying job in Phoenix that kept him away most of the time, which meant Carol had nothing but hours to fill by making everyone else's life miserable. Within her first week as HOA president, she'd already sent out 3 violation notices to different homeowners. Mrs. Henderson got cited for having her garbage cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though she'd just forgotten to wheel them back after trash pickup. The Martinses got a notice because their grass was supposedly a 1/4 inch too tall, measured with an actual ruler that Carol carried in her designer handbag. And young Derek Sanders got written up because his car had a small crack in the windshield, which Carol deemed unsightly and detrimental to property values. I managed to avoid her attention for the first few months. I kept my yard immaculate, parked my truck in the garage, and generally kept to myself. I work as an electrician for a commercial contractor in Phoenix, which means I'm usually gone from 6 in the morning until around 5 in the evening. On weekends, I like to tinker with my car in the garage or just relax with a beer on my back patio. I wasn't bothering anyone. The outlet situation started in late June. I'd installed it myself about a year earlier on the side of my house that faces the shared walkway between my property and the community green space. It was just a standard outdoor outlet with a weatherproof cover, mainly so I could plug in my electric hedge trimmer or power washer without running extension cords through the house. Completely normal, completely legal, and definitely on my property. One evening in early July, I came home from work and noticed my front door had one of those dreaded HOA violation notices stuck to it. I groaned, figuring Carol had found some microscopic issue with my house to complain about. But when I read it, I was genuinely confused. The notice stated that I needed to remove the unauthorized electrical outlet from the front exterior of my home within 14 days or face a $50 daily fine. According to Carol's lengthy explanation, external outlets were not architecturally consistent with the neighborhood aesthetic and violated Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA guidelines. I went inside, tossed my work bag on the couch, and immediately pulled out my copy of the HOA bylaws. I'd read them when I bought the house, but admittedly hadn't looked at them since. I flipped to Section 12, Paragraph 4, and read it 3 times. It said nothing about electrical outlets. The section was about not installing satellite dishes on the front-facing roof. There was absolutely nothing about outlets. I decided to deal with it the next day. After a long shower and a reheated pizza, I fell asleep on the couch watching a Diamondbacks game. The next morning, Saturday, I walked outside to really look at this supposedly offensive outlet. That's when I noticed something strange. There was an extension cord plugged into it. A heavy-duty orange extension cord that snaked along the side of my house, across the walkway, and disappeared into the community green space toward the back of the neighborhood. I followed the cord, my confusion growing with each step. It ran through some decorative bushes along the edge of the walking path and finally ended at a small utility shed near the community pool area. The shed door was padlocked, but through the small window I could see the cord was connected to what looked like a large refrigerator or freezer. "Can I help you?" I spun around to find Carol standing there with her arms crossed, wearing her typical pressed khakis and a polo with HOA president embroidered on it. She actually had shirts made. "Yeah, actually, you can," I said, pointing at the extension cord. "This is plugged into my house. Into my electricity. Is the HOA running something out of this shed?" Her face twitched slightly, but she maintained her stern expression. "That's community property and not your concern." "It becomes my concern when you're using my electricity to power it," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "How long has this been plugged in?" "The HOA has the right to use community resources as needed," she said, completely ignoring my question. "My house isn't a community resource. That's my private property and my electricity." Carol's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps if you removed that unsightly outlet as requested, this wouldn't be an issue. I expect compliance within the stated time frame." She turned and walked away before I could respond. I stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then I walked back to my house, unplugged the extension cord from my outlet, and coiled it up on the ground. If Carol wanted to power whatever was in that shed, she could figure out another way to do it. Monday after work, I stopped by the HOA management office, which was really just a small room in the community clubhouse that Carol had claimed as her personal domain. She was there, naturally, typing something on a laptop with the intensity of someone drafting a declaration of war. "We need to talk about my electricity usage," I said from the doorway. She didn't look up. "Office hours are by appointment only. I don't need an appointment to discuss the fact that you've been stealing my electricity." That got her attention. She stopped typing and gave me a look that could have frozen lava. "Excuse me," the extension cord, plugged into my outlet, running to the community shed. "That's theft of utilities, Carol." She stood up slowly, her hands flat on the desk. "I already explained that community needs supersede individual complaints. The HOA is entitled to reasonable accommodation from homeowners. Show me where that's written in the bylaws. I don't have to justify HOA decisions to you." "Actually, you kind of do. I'm a homeowner here. I pay my dues." "And nowhere in the bylaws does it say you can just help yourself to my electricity." Carol's face was starting to turn pink. "If you have a formal complaint, you can submit it in writing to the HOA board for review at the next quarterly meeting." "When's that?" "September 15th. "It was July 9th. "That's over 2 months away. Those are the procedures." She sat back down and returned to her typing, clearly considering the conversation over. I left the office fuming but tried to calm myself down on the drive home. I'd unplugged the cord. The problem was solved. I just needed to ignore the bogus violation notice about the outlet and move on with my life. Except when I got home, the extension cord was plugged back into my outlet. I unplugged it again, this time taking it completely away from my property and leaving it coiled in a pile on the community walkway. Inside my house, I looked up the phone number for the HOA management company that technically oversaw our neighborhood. I got a voicemail saying the office was closed but would reopen Tuesday morning at 9. I left a detailed message explaining the situation. Tuesday evening, I got a call back from a bored-sounding guy named Rick, who said he was the regional manager for the HOA management company. "Yeah, so I listened to your message," he said. "Couple things. First, the HOA president does have some discretion in utilizing community resources for community benefits. Second, we're talking about an electrical outlet here, right? How much power could it possibly be using?" "That's not the point," I said. "It's the principle. She can't just help herself to my electricity without asking or compensating me." "Look, man, I get it. But these neighborhood disputes, they're usually better resolved between neighbors. Have you tried just talking to Mrs. Timmons?" "I have. She says it's community property." "Your outlet?" "No, whatever she's powering with it. She won't tell me what it is." Rick sighed. "Tell you what, I'll send her an email reminding her that homeowner property should be respected. Beyond that, you might need to take it up at the next board meeting. These things have processes. So everyone keeps telling me." After we hung up, I felt like I'd just wasted 20 minutes of my life. I went outside to check, and sure enough, the extension cord was plugged into my outlet again. This time I went into my garage, found my socket set, and removed the outlet cover entirely, disconnecting the wires and capping them safely. Let her try to plug in now. The next morning, Wednesday, I had another violation notice on my door. This one stated that I had damaged community infrastructure and was being fined $100 with an additional $50 per day until the damage was repaired. The notice claimed that the electrical outlet was actually HOA property because it was visible from the community walkway and therefore part of the shared aesthetic experience of the neighborhood. I actually laughed out loud when I read that. The shared aesthetic experience. Carol was completely making this up as she went along. I took photos of the notice, photos of the outlet location clearly on my property, and photos of my property line markers. Then, I drafted a detailed email to the HOA board, which consisted of Carol and 4 other homeowners. I explained the entire situation, attached the photos, and requested an emergency board meeting to address what was clearly an abuse of authority. By Friday, I'd received exactly one response from a guy named Phil who lived 3 streets over. His email said, "This seems like something Carol should handle. She's the president. Trust her judgment." So much for the board providing oversight. That weekend, I decided to do some investigating. Saturday morning, I walked over to the utility shed with my phone camera ready. The extension cord was now running from somewhere else, probably another neighbor's house, based on the direction. The shed was still locked, but I took photos of everything, including the business license posting on the shed door that I hadn't noticed before. It was registered to Carol Timmons for something called Sagaro Specialty Catering Services. So that's what this was about. Carol was running a business out of the community shed, and she'd been using my electricity to power her commercial refrigerator or freezer. This wasn't about community needs at all. This was about her personal business. I did some more research when I got home. According to the HOA bylaws, commercial activities within the community required board approval and appropriate cost sharing for any utilities used. There was nothing in the meeting minutes, which were posted online, about any catering business being approved. Monday morning, I called in sick to work. Instead, I drove to the Mesa City offices and filed a formal complaint about unpermitted commercial activity in a residential HOA. The clerk told me it would probably take a few weeks to investigate, but they'd send someone out. I also called the Arizona Corporation Commission to file a complaint about utility theft. They were more interested, especially when I mentioned it was for a commercial operation. They said they'd send me some forms to document the usage and damages. When I got home around noon, I found Carol standing on my front porch with her phone pointed at my house, taking pictures. "Can I help you?" I asked, using her own line from before. "Documenting violations," she said without lowering her phone. "You still haven't repaired the damaged outlet. That outlet is on my property, installed by me, using my materials. It's not HOA property." "That's not what the architectural committee determined." "What architectural committee?" "According to the bylaws, that committee hasn't met in 3 years. Carol finally lowered her phone. "I am the architectural committee. You can't be a one-person committee. The bylaws require at least 3 members. I can and I am." "Now, are you going to repair that outlet or continue to rack up daily fines?" "I'm not paying any fines. What I am going to do is continue reporting your theft of my electricity to the appropriate authorities." Her expression changed then, a flash of something that might have been actual concern. "I have no idea what you're talking about. The extension cord. The one you had plugged into my house. The one running to your commercial catering business in the community shed. Ring any bells? That's community equipment for community events." "Then why is it registered to you personally?" "Why does your business license list that address?" Carol's face went through several color changes. "You're harassing me. I'm documenting this harassment." She held up her phone again, now filming me. "Go ahead." "While you're documenting, I'll just mention that I've filed complaints with the city about unpermitted commercial activity and with the Corporation Commission about utility theft. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your documentation." She lowered the phone slowly. "You filed complaints?" "Sure did. This morning." "You're going to regret this," she said, her voice dropping to something almost threatening. "I will make your life in this neighborhood a living hell. You're already doing that. At least now I'm fighting back." Carol turned and marched down my walkway to her white Lexus SUV parked on the street. She peeled out like a teenager, leaving rubber marks that were definitely against HOA guidelines. Not that I was going to point that out. The rest of July was relatively quiet. I didn't get any more violation notices, and the extension cord disappeared from the community walkway entirely. I went back to work, kept my head down, and waited to see what would happen with my complaints. Then my August utility bill arrived. I opened it expecting my normal summer usage, which in Arizona means a pretty hefty bill thanks to air conditioning. My usual August bill ran around $250. This one was $673. I called the utility company immediately. After being transferred 3 times, I finally got someone who could pull up my account and review the usage. "Yes, sir. I'm showing significantly increased usage for your property throughout July," the representative said. "Your kilowatt hours nearly tripled compared to your June usage." "That's impossible. I live alone and I wasn't even running my AC any more than usual. It was actually a cooler July." "The meter doesn't lie, sir. Is it possible someone else has access to your electricity?" And that's when it clicked. The extension cord had been plugged into my outlet for who knows how long before I discovered it. I'd unplugged it multiple times, but Carol had kept plugging it back in, probably at night when I wouldn't notice. And even after I'd removed the outlet cover, she must have found another way to access my power or had been using it for weeks before I caught her. "Actually, yes," I told the representative. "I caught my HOA president stealing my electricity to run her business. I need to know the exact dates of the increased usage so I can document this." The representative put me on hold for several minutes. When she came back, she had more specific information. I'm showing the usage increase started around June 20th and continued through July 28th. There's a significant drop after that, which aligns with your normal usage pattern. June 20th. That was over a month before I'd even noticed the extension cord. Carol had been stealing my electricity for more than 5 weeks. Can you email me a detailed breakdown of the daily usage? I asked. I can do that. I should also mention that if you believe there's theft of service, you should file a police report. The utility company can cooperate with law enforcement investigations. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat down and did the math. My normal July bill should have been around $270 based on my previous summer months. Instead, it was $673. That meant Carol had cost me roughly $400 in stolen electricity. $400. I was furious. This wasn't just some petty neighborhood dispute anymore. This was actual, quantifiable theft. I pulled up the non-emergency number for Mesa Police and called to ask about filing a report. The officer who answered listened to my explanation, and then told me I needed to come down to the station to file a formal report. I asked if I could do it that evening after work, and he said that would be fine. Before I left for the police station, I printed out everything I had. The utility bills showing the increase, the emails documenting my complaints to Carol and the HOA board, photos of the extension cord and the shed, the business license information for Carol's catering company. I put it all in a folder and drove to the Mesa Police Department. The officer who took my report was a middle-aged guy named Officer Sandoval, who actually seemed interested in the situation. He reviewed all my documentation carefully and asked several questions about the timeline. So you're saying this Carol Timmons used approximately $400 of your electricity without permission to run a commercial refrigeration unit for her business, he summarized. That's exactly what I'm saying. And when I confronted her about it, she tried to claim it was for community purposes, but the shed is registered to her business. Officer Sandoval nodded. Theft of utilities is a real thing. The challenge is usually proving intent and that the person knowingly stole the service. In this case, you've got the extension cord, the business license, and her own admissions about using community resources, which she later claimed was the outlet on your property. That's pretty solid. So, what happens now? I'll write up the report and pass it to a detective. They'll review the evidence and determine if they want to pursue charges. Given the amount involved, $400, we're looking at a Class 1 misdemeanor in Arizona. They'll probably want to interview both you and Mrs. Timmons. How long does that usually take? Could be a few weeks, could be a couple months. Depends on the caseload. But with this level of documentation, I'd expect someone will follow up fairly soon. I left the police station feeling better than I had in weeks. I'd done everything right. Documented everything, followed the proper channels, and now law enforcement was involved. Carol couldn't just bully her way out of this one. Tuesday evening, I got a call from an unknown local number. It was Carol's husband, whose name I learned was Dennis. "Mr. Trent, this is Dennis Timmons," he said in a tired voice. "I'm calling about this situation with my wife and your electricity." "Okay," I said cautiously. "Look, Carol told me her version of events, but I pulled our home utility bills and did some checking on her business accounts. I think I have a pretty good idea of what actually happened. Which is," he sighed heavily, "my wife got it in her head that she could run her catering business out of that community shed. She needed somewhere to store prepared foods and ingredients, and the shed had space. Instead of doing it properly, applying for permits, setting up a proper utility account, she decided to just use whatever power was convenient. That turned out to be your outlet." "For over a month," I said. "Yeah, I saw the dates. I'm really sorry about this. Carol has a tendency to get tunnel vision about things. She convinces herself that she's right and everyone else is just being difficult. That doesn't excuse theft. You're right, it doesn't. What can we do to make this right? I'm prepared to reimburse you for the electricity she used. I saw you estimate $400 based on the difference in my utility bill. Yes. I'll write you a check for $500 to cover the electricity and your trouble, and I'll make sure Carol shuts down whatever she's doing in that shed and apologizes to you. It was tempting. $500 would more than cover the cost, and I'd avoid the drama of a prolonged legal process. But something made me pause. I appreciate the offer, Dennis. I really do. But the problem is bigger than just the money. Your wife abused her position as HOA president to benefit her personal business. She violated my property rights, filed false violation notices against me, threatened me, and when I caught her, she tried to cover it up with made-up HOA rules. If I just accept payment and walk away, what's to stop her from doing something like this to someone else? There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, Dennis spoke. You're right. You're absolutely right. Carol needs to face consequences or she'll never change. I've been enabling her behavior for years by cleaning up her messes. What do you want to happen here? Honestly, I want her to resign as HOA president. I want a formal apology to the entire neighborhood for abusing her authority, and I want reimbursement for the electricity. If she does those things, I'll consider asking the police to drop the investigation. That's more than fair, Dennis said. Let me talk to her. Can I call you back in a day or two? Sure. We hung up, and I felt a small glimmer of hope that maybe this could be resolved without turning into a full legal nightmare. I wasn't holding my breath, though. Carol didn't strike me as the type to apologize for anything. I was right. The next evening, I found another violation notice on my door. This one claimed that my truck was parked in a manner inconsistent with neighborhood standards because it was backed into my driveway instead of pulled in forward. The fine, $250. I took a photo of the notice and immediately texted it to Dennis at the number he'd called from. Is this your wife's idea of making things right? I wrote. He called me within minutes. I'm so sorry. I talked to Carol last night and she completely refused to see reason. She's convinced that you're the problem and that she's done nothing wrong. I tried to explain the seriousness of the situation, but she just accused me of taking your side against her. So what now? I don't know. I'm honestly at my wits' end with her. This isn't the first time she's gone overboard with something and refused to back down. Dennis, I appreciate you trying, but I'm not backing down either. She stole from me, lied about it, and now she's retaliating with made-up violations. I'm going to move forward with the police investigation and let them handle it. I understand. For what it's worth, I'm sorry you got caught up in Carol's nonsense. After we hung up, I texted Officer Sandoval's card number and left a message updating him about the situation and the new retaliation. Then, I took detailed photos of my truck in my driveway, along with photos of at least 6 other vehicles in the neighborhood that were also backed in. If Carol wanted to play the fake violations game, I'd document everything. The next few weeks were exhausting. Carol escalated her campaign of petty harassment to an absurd degree. I received violation notices for leaving my garage door open while I worked inside on a Saturday morning, for having a package sitting on my front porch for more than 24 hours, and for excessive noise when I mowed my lawn at 2 in the afternoon on a Sunday. Each time, I documented everything and sent updates to Officer Sandoval. Other neighbors started noticing Carol's behavior too. Mrs. Henderson stopped by one evening to tell me that Carol had given her 3 violation notices in 1 week, all for ridiculous things. The Martinses mentioned that they were considering moving because dealing with the HOA had become unbearable. In mid-August, I finally got a call from a Detective Ramirez who had been assigned to my case. "Mr. Trent, I've reviewed your report and all the documentation you provided. I've also reviewed the follow-up reports about the continued harassment. I'd like to meet with you and go over everything in detail. Are you available tomorrow afternoon?" We set up a meeting at the police station for the next day at 4. I took the afternoon off work and brought an updated folder with every violation notice Carol had sent me, along with evidence that none of them were legitimate. Detective Ramirez was a sharp woman in her 40s who took notes on everything I said. She asked detailed questions about the timeline, the extension cord, Carol's business, and the retaliatory violations. "This is pretty clear-cut utility theft," she said after I'd finished explaining everything. "The challenge is that Mrs. Timmons will likely claim she believed she had permission or authority to use the outlet. What's interesting is the business angle. Running a commercial operation out of a residential community shed without proper permits is a separate issue entirely. I filed a complaint with the city about that too," I said. "I saw that in the report. Has anyone from code enforcement contacted you?" "Not yet." Detective Ramirez made another note. "I'm going to bring Mrs. Timmons in for an interview. Based on what you've told me and what's in the file, I believe we have enough for charges, but I want to hear her side first. Sometimes people surprise you and admit everything." "I wouldn't count on it with Carol." She smiled slightly. "I've dealt with plenty of difficult people. I'll be in touch." 3 days later, Detective Ramirez called me back. "I interviewed Mrs. Timmons today. That was an interesting conversation." "How so?" "She denied everything. Said she never plugged anything into your outlet, never ran an extension cord to the shed, and that your accusations were part of a personal vendetta because she'd cited you for legitimate HOA violations. She also claimed you'd been harassing her and her family." "That's completely false." "I know." Here's what makes her story fall apart. I drove by the community shed after our interview, and guess what I found? An extension cord running from a different house, 3 doors down from yours, into that same shed. I knocked on the door, and the homeowner, a nice older gentleman named Frank, said Mrs. Timmons had asked him if she could borrow power for a community refrigerator that she claimed was for neighborhood events. He said yes, because he trusted her as HOA president. He had no idea it was for her business. She moved on to her next victim. Exactly. And Frank showed me his latest utility bill. It's also significantly higher than normal, so now we have a pattern of behavior. I'm moving forward with charges. "What kind of charges?" "Theft of utilities in your case, which is a Class 1 misdemeanor. But with the second victim and the commercial aspect, I'm also recommending fraud charges. The county attorney will make the final decision on what to file." "How long does that take?" "Could be a few weeks. But I wanted you to know that your case is solid, and we're taking it seriously." I thanked her and hung up feeling genuinely relieved. Finally, someone with actual authority was holding Carol accountable. The next weekend, I was washing my truck in the driveway when Frank from 3 doors down walked over. He was in his 70s, a retired teacher who'd lived in the neighborhood for over a decade. "Cameron, right?" he said. "That's right. You're Frank?" "Yes, I wanted to apologize to you. That detective told me what Carol did, using your electricity for her business and then doing the same to me. I had no idea. When she asked to use my outlet, she made it sound like it was for the whole neighborhood. It's not your fault. She lied to you too." I feel like an idiot for falling for it. My electric bill jumped nearly $300 last month. My wife and I couldn't figure out why. We thought maybe the AC was failing. Did the detective tell you that you could file a complaint too? She did. I'm going to think about it. Meantime, I unplugged that extension cord and told Carol to stay off my property. We chatted for a few more minutes, and Frank mentioned that several other homeowners were getting fed up with Carol's leadership. There was talk of calling a special election to remove her as HOA president, but no one wanted to deal with the drama of organizing it. Maybe you won't have to, I said. If the criminal charges go through, she might not have a choice but to resign. From your lips to God's ears, Frank said. September brought some developments. First, I received a formal notice from the Mesa City Code Enforcement Office that they'd completed their investigation into unpermitted commercial activity at the community shed. The notice stated that Carol Timmons had been operating a catering business without proper permits and that the shed space was not zoned for commercial use. She was being fined and ordered to cease all commercial operations immediately. Second, I got a call from Dennis Timmons again. He sounded even more exhausted than the last time we talked. Cameron, I wanted to let you know that Carol and I are separating. I'm moving out at the end of the month. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be. This has been a long time coming. The situation with you was really just the final straw. I've been making excuses for Carol's behavior for years, and I'm done. She needs professional help, but she refuses to admit she has a problem. For what it's worth, I never wanted to cause problems in your marriage. You didn't cause anything. Carol's actions caused this. But I am calling because I want to make sure you're compensated for what she did. She's not going to do it voluntarily, so I'm doing it. Can I send you a check for $500? Dennis, you don't have to do that. The criminal case will handle restitution. I know I don't have to. But I want to. Consider it my way of trying to make up for not reining in Carol's behavior sooner, please. I thought about it for a moment. Okay, thank you, that's really generous. I'll drop it by your house this weekend. And Cameron, I hope the rest of the neighborhood eventually gets her removed as HOA president. She's not fit for the position. The check arrived that Saturday in my mailbox, along with a handwritten note from Dennis apologizing again. I deposited it and sent him a thank you text. In late September, I received a notice to appear in court. Carol had been formally charged with 2 counts of theft of utilities and 1 count of fraud. The hearing was scheduled for October 15th. The weeks leading up to the court date were surprisingly calm. Carol stopped sending me violation notices, probably on the advice of her lawyer. I saw her occasionally around the neighborhood, but she always looked the other way or quickly went inside when she spotted me. Other neighbors started asking me about what was happening. Word had spread about the charges, and people were shocked that their HOA president was facing criminal prosecution. The HOA board finally took some action, placing Carol on administrative leave pending the outcome of the case. Phil, the same guy who'd told me to trust Carol's judgment, was appointed interim president. To his credit, Phil called me within a week of taking over. Cameron, I owe you an apology. I should have listened to your concerns instead of dismissing them. Carol showed me some selective information that made it seem like you were just being difficult. I didn't realize she was actually breaking the law. I appreciate you saying that. I'm going through all the violation notices she issued over the past few months. Most of them are completely bogus. I'm voiding everything that doesn't have clear support in the bylaws. That's probably going to be most of them. Yeah, I'm realizing that. She really went off the rails. Anyway, your violations are all voided, obviously. And if she ends up being convicted, The board will move to permanently remove her and potentially take legal action to recover any HOA funds she misused. Were there HOA funds involved? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Some of the financial records are a mess, but that's not your problem. I just wanted you to know that we're taking this seriously now. October 15th arrived faster than I expected. I dressed in business casual, grabbed my folder of documentation, and drove to the courthouse. Detective Ramirez had told me I'd probably need to testify, so I'd taken the whole day off work. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Carol was already there with her lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in a power suit. Carol herself looked terrible. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled for once, and she'd lost the confident, aggressive demeanor I'd always seen from her. She looked scared. Frank was there too, sitting a few rows behind me. We nodded at each other. The prosecutor was a young guy named Jason Reeves who looked like he'd just graduated law school but spoke with surprising authority. He laid out the charges clearly. Carol had knowingly used electrical service from my property without permission to operate commercial equipment for personal financial gain. She'd done the same to Frank. When confronted, she'd lied about her actions and retaliated against me with fraudulent HOA violations. Carol's lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding. Carol believed as HOA president she had authority to use homeowner resources for community purposes. The catering business was intended to provide affordable food for neighborhood events. The prosecutor destroyed that argument pretty quickly. He presented Carol's business license, which showed she was operating as a for-profit business, not a community service. He showed bank records that Detective Ramirez had subpoenaed, revealing that Carol had made over $8,000 from her catering business over 3 months. He presented my testimony and Frank's testimony about our utility bills. He showed photos of the extension cords and the equipment in the shed. The judge, an older woman named Judge Morrison, listened to everything with a stern expression. When both sides had finished presenting their cases, she didn't take long to make her decision. Mrs. Timmons, I find the evidence against you compelling and your defense unconvincing. You clearly knew what you were doing when you connected your business equipment to these homeowners' electrical services without permission. The fact that you moved your operation from one property to another after being caught demonstrates awareness of wrongdoing. I'm finding you guilty on all counts. Carol's face went pale. Her lawyer started to say something, but Judge Morrison held up her hand. For sentencing, I'm taking into account that this is your first offense, and that some restitution has already been made. However, the breach of trust involved in using your position as HOA president to facilitate this theft is an aggravating factor. I'm sentencing you to 1-year probation, 100 hours of community service, and ordering full restitution to both victims for their utility costs plus damages. Additionally, you're prohibited from holding any position of authority in any homeowners association during your probation period. The actual dollar amount worked out to Carol owing me $400 for the electricity she'd used, since Dennis had already paid me $500, and I'd agreed that covered everything. She owed Frank $340, plus court costs and fees. Carol started crying. Her lawyer put an arm around her shoulders and whispered something to her. The judge banged her gavel and it was over. Outside the courtroom, Frank and I stood together in the hallway. Detective Ramirez came over to congratulate us on the outcome. You both did everything right, she said. You documented everything, reported through proper channels, and didn't let intimidation stop you. That's how the system is supposed to work. Thanks for taking it seriously, I said. Utility theft is real theft. People sometimes forget that. And when someone abuses a position of trust like she did, it needs consequences. Frank and I walked out to the parking lot together. He seemed relieved but also sad. "I never thought it would come to this," he said. "When I moved to this neighborhood 10 years ago, it was such a nice community. Carol really did a number on it in just a few months. Hopefully things will get better now." "I hope so. Are you going to stay?" I thought about it. "Yeah, I think so. I like my house. And most of the neighbors are good people. We just had one bad apple in a position of power." "That's all it takes sometimes," Frank said. "Anyway, I'm glad this is over. See you around the neighborhood, Cameron." "See you around, Frank." The aftermath of Carol's conviction rippled through the Saguaro Heights community for weeks. The HOA board held an emergency meeting in late October to formally remove Carol from the presidency and to discuss reforms to prevent future abuses of power. I actually attended this one, along with about 40 other homeowners who'd suddenly become very interested in HOA governance. Phil ran the meeting efficiently. He presented a series of proposed changes to the bylaws, including term limits for board positions, requiring board approval for any enforcement actions over $100, and mandatory financial audits every year. Everything passed unanimously. During the open comment period, several homeowners stood up to share their own experiences with Carol's overreach. Mrs. Henderson talked about the stress of receiving constant violation notices over tiny issues. The Martinses mentioned they'd almost sold their house to escape the harassment. A woman named Patricia described how Carol had threatened to fine her $500 because her teenage son's car had an aftermarket spoiler that Carol deemed garish. "I'm just glad someone finally stood up to her," Patricia said, looking directly at me. "Thank you, Cameron." Several other people echoed that sentiment. It was embarrassing but also validating. I hadn't set out to be any kind of neighborhood hero. I just wanted to stop someone from stealing my electricity and abusing her power. But apparently, by fighting back, I'd freed a lot of people from a situation they'd felt powerless to change. After the meeting, Phil pulled me aside. "The board would like you to consider joining us. We're going to have an open position in January, and we think you'd bring a good perspective." "I'm not really interested in running an HOA," I said honestly. "Just think about it. You don't have to decide now, but we need people who are willing to push back against nonsense and stand up for what's right. That's you." I told him I'd think about it, which was the most commitment I was willing to make. November brought closure to the final pieces of the situation. Carol completed her probation intake process and was scheduled to begin her community service in December. The HOA hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations, taking a lot of the burden off the volunteer board members. And most importantly, Carol and Dennis's house went up for sale. I ran into Dennis one Saturday when he was outside directing movers. He looked better than the last time I'd seen him, less stressed and worn down. "Cameron, hey," he said, walking over. "I wanted to say goodbye. Where are you headed?" "I got a transfer to our San Diego office. Fresh start, you know. Carol's staying here with her parents until the house sells." "Then I'm not sure what she'll do. That's not my problem anymore." "I hope things work out for you, Dennis. You were always decent to me." "I should have been decent to you sooner before any of this happened, but I appreciate you saying that. Take care of yourself." He shook my hand and went back to directing the movers. I never saw him again. Carol's house sold in early December to a young couple with a baby. They seemed nice when I introduced myself and warned them about the neighborhood's recent drama. They laughed and said they'd researched the HOA thoroughly before buying and were relieved to see the reforms that had been implemented. The holidays came and went. My utility bills returned to normal. The neighborhood settled into a comfortable routine without Carol's constant surveillance and harassment. People seemed friendlier, more relaxed. The tension that had been building during her reign just evaporated. In January, I finally agreed to join the HOA board. Not as president, just as a regular member. I figured I owed it to the community after everything that had happened. Plus, it was only a 2-year commitment and Phil was still president, so most of the actual work fell to him. My first board meeting was refreshingly boring. We approved some landscaping work for the community entrance. We discussed whether to repaint the clubhouse. We reviewed the budget and confirmed that everything was in order financially. No drama, no power trips, just neighbors working together to maintain their community. After the meeting, I stopped by the old utility shed on my way home. The HOA had converted it into storage for pool maintenance equipment and community event supplies. No refrigerators, no extension cords, no shady business operations, just cleaning supplies and pool floats. Looking at it, I still couldn't quite believe that a simple electrical outlet had caused so much chaos. But it wasn't really about the outlet, was it? It was about someone who thought their authority put them above the rules, who believed they could take what they wanted without consequences. The outlet was just how it all came to light. I walked back to my house as the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. My truck was parked in my driveway, backed in the way I preferred, with no violation notice on my door. My yard looked good. My house looked good. Everything was exactly as it should be, and on the side of my house, still visible from the community walkway, was my electrical outlet. I'd reinstalled it after the court case concluded, properly covered and secured. I even used it sometimes when I needed to plug in my hedge trimmer, but I'd added one small modification. Right above the outlet, I'd mounted a small weatherproof sign that read, "Private property. Authorized use only." It made me smile every time I saw it. A $400 lesson about respecting boundaries, both literal and figurative. Carol had learned it the hard way, with a criminal record and a destroyed reputation. I'd learned it too in a different way. I'd learned that sometimes the right thing to do is fight back against injustice, even when it's uncomfortable or difficult. I'd also learned to read the HOA bylaws very carefully, to document everything, and to never assume that someone's title meant they had unlimited authority. Important lessons for anyone living in an HOA community. As I unlocked my front door and stepped inside my quiet, peaceful home, I felt grateful. Grateful that the drama was over. Grateful for neighbors like Frank who were willing to stand together against wrongdoing. And grateful that the system, slow and frustrating as it sometimes was, had ultimately worked the way it was supposed to. My electric outlet was mine again, my utility bills were back to normal, and Carol Timmons was someone else's problem now. Life in Saguaro Heights had returned to what it should have been all along. Quiet, boring, and blissfully drama-free, and that was exactly how I liked it.